Okay, I have gone ahead and started the stream. Since we're just going to pick it up from where we left off, and hopefully we will get 6 here in a minute.
So Brad, do you want me to go ahead and start or wait just a little longer?
Let's go ahead and give Katie a couple more minutes.
Okay.
Email. I sent her an email. I've not sent anything back. If any of y'all by any chance have a cell phone and wanted to try to get in touch with her, that would be awesome. I do not.
We used to have that list of all of our planning commissioner contact info, or was that just addresses and emails?
I think we may have, Rick may have one, but it's probably just email addresses too. Anything we've got, we keep top secret. But I don't have her in my phone, and
Yeah, let me see if I have her.
I don't either.
I don't have anything other than email.
I'm checking on it.
Same.
I have a work number.
All right.
Okay.
that's her.
Yes, hi.
Awesome.
It's Katie.
Hey, all right.
Oh, and my WebEx just loaded actually. Looks like it's a slow connection though, but I'll be here one way or another.
All right. Well, we are good.
Great.
We've got 6. We are recording, and you can go ahead and call the continuation of the meeting to order, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I think we're just going to get right into it. I want to call this meeting to order. October 25th Planning Commission meeting. That's a continuation of our October 7th meeting. And I'll go ahead and, unless something else needs to be done, I'll hand it over to, I think, Buck, are you going to speak first?
I will. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Buck's going to share, and just if anybody is watching, this is item number 7, 6. It's item number 6 under new business. At the end of our meeting on the 7th, there was a brief presentation made. There was a request for additional information from the Planning Commission, and then at that point, the meeting was continued to allow the applicants to go prepare some more graphics. That is what Buck is going to present you with. I think at this point, because you've asked, there's no reason to put them on a 10-minute clock. I think, as much as they can provide you to assist you in your decision, the better. If he gets talking too long, Madam Chair, you can always cut Buck off, or I can mute him. So,
Okay.
Go ahead, Buck.
I think, Brad, you're just supposed to start playing music.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I'm
Alice.
sorry. May I just ask one thing? This is an unusual type of item that comes before the Planning Commission. So Brad, will you just walk us through before Buck gives us the presentation?
Sure, be happy to. This is a request for alternative compliance that the Planning Commission is being asked to consider. In cases of alternative compliance, the Planning Commission is the final decision-making body. And there are a set of standards that are established in the zoning ordinance in section 910 that talks about it. It's basically you serving in the role as a design review board in instances where an applicant within the commercial downtown zoning district and not in the local historic district is unable to meet design standards as set forth in the ordinance. They have an opportunity to bring forward a design to you and present it to you and make their argument as to why they feel they're going to identify where they don't meet the underlying design standards, but they feel like they still meet the spirit and intent. If ultimately you find as a planning commission that you agree with them, and it gets into issues, I think the ordinance says it pretty well, that says the planning commission shall review alternative compliance applications in light of any comments received, the intent of the standards of this section, and the applicable guidelines. An alternative compliance application may be approved upon a finding by the planning commission that the request would result in public benefits greater than any negative impacts. Request is consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies set forth in the comp plan. Request is consistent with the attributes of the downtown and of the design area described in the guidelines, and the request conforms to the relevant alternative guidelines. So it allows you to look at it in a greater context, make that decision. If you were to approve this, then I'm going to take the plans that were presented to you tonight, and when this comes through the permitting process for construction permits, we're going to ensure that what they showed you and what's on the construction set is very much in keeping. It doesn't go all the way to the level of binding, but it needs to be very, very close, and it needs to reflect what you all will see tonight. And that's ultimately my responsibility to ensure that that happens if you were to approve it. So in a nutshell, that we don't do these. I think you've only done it one time. And so we will turn it over to Buck. If that's, is that enough, Alice? Okay, great.
All right, I'm gonna share my screen. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. So again, this is Bethel Midtown Village. This is particularly for phase 1 in alternative compliance. So our request is to allow multiple ground floor dwellings to use shared access to the public sidewalks, and for multiple retaining walls to
Buck,
exceed.
is your screen right now, are you seeing a brown screen or are you seeing graphics? Because I'm not.
We're just
Okay.
seeing a kind of a dark gray block.
Let me try again.
There we go.
Okay, awesome. So, right, so the purpose of this request is to allow multiple ground floor dwellings to use shared access to the public sidewalks, and for multiple retaining walls to exceed the maximum allowed height to setback ratio. More specifically, the design standards for the CD zone found in section 910.6 D7A and 910.6 C8. And then just to kind of give you guys some context, the North Downtown Design Area, this text is directly from Athens-Clarke County's Alternative Compliance Guidelines 4CD. I think it's important to note that the North Downtown Design Area is a little bit different from the urban core of downtown. So this design area is bounded approximately by North Hall Street, the CSX Railroad to the north, Thomas Lay Park to the east, and Strong Street, 1 block north of Dougherty Street. And the North Downtown area is anticipated to develop with substantial amount of residential units. That's what you're seeing tonight. Apartment buildings, townhomes, and high-rise mixed-use developments that create a mix of building forms. These may be more variety in the character of street edge in this area, and that the building should be oriented to and positioned closer to College Avenue. I'm going to read all of that. Highlighted in yellow, it's anticipated that some of these buildings may be set back from the street edge. In such a case, a green landscape foreground should predominate. Development should also reflect the topography of the area by stepping building forms. And so I think that's what you're going to see in our presentation tonight. The specific sections of code that we're asking for alternative compliance. This is 910-6D7A, which requires ground floor dwellings with an exterior elevation facing a street to have direct pedestrian access to the street and public sidewalk. And so tonight we're asking you for an alternative means of complying with this ordinance. The second item we're asking for is in regards to retaining walls. So 910-6C8, specifically retaining walls in the front yard, rear yard, or sidewalk adjacent to a public right-of-way or private street. That's our scenario. Should be set back from the public right-of-way a minimum of 2 feet for every foot of wall height above 3 feet in height. And then it also continues and says that terrace areas shall have a minimum 5-foot depth as measured from the upper grade of the lower retaining wall to the base of the upper retaining wall. So these are the items that we're asking or seeking alternative compliance to. You guys, I think, are familiar with the existing site. This is the Bethel Village site. It's currently subsidized housing, and it has existing topographic challenges, right, from running from south to north. So if you imagine Strong Street and Hoyt Street, there's about a 90-foot drop in elevation across the site. So in this slide, you can see the current development as it exists today, and then the proposed redevelopment. And so what you see highlighted is phase 1, and that's what we're here to discuss this evening. And you can see the future phases in the background. So if you read staff's report, one of the things that they noted is that the design area and the alternative compliance for dwelling units and retaining walls does not have a specific guide for alternative compliance. And so staff's recommendation was that in lieu of these guidelines not being specifically contained within the alternative compliance documents, that we should consider these general design principles. That is, creating a pedestrian-friendly environment, establishing a sense of visual continuity while encouraging creativity and diversity in building form, promoting a mix of uses that contribute to the vitality of downtown, and conveying a sense of human scale. So what we wanted to explain is what we don't want in our community, right? So the next couple of slides are images of what we don't want. So this is along Wilkinson Street. This is the retaining wall behind the mark. This is the impetus for the retaining wall ordinance that you see before you tonight, right? So this is another image of Wilkinson Street in the backside of the park. Again, this is what we don't want. Again, this is a blank wall along the mark, what we don't want. These are some apartments on North Avenue. You can see that this is just not an inviting retaining wall in sight. We have steps to the back entrance of apartments. Again, this is what we're trying to avoid. This is the standard. This elevation faces North Avenue. And so this is near the intersection of North Avenue and Thomas and Doherty. Again, a picture of what we don't want: retaining walls with very limited screening or vegetation, no real direct access from the street to the building. It's just not what we want. So what we do want, right? A pedestrian-friendly environment, a sense of visual continuity that encourages creativity and diversity, a mix of uses that contributes to the vitality of downtown, and a sense of human scale. So the next couple of slides are going to be some example images of what we're proposing and what I think the intent or spirit of the ordinance and the alternative compliance is. So creating a pedestrian-friendly environment. So you can see we have a sidewalk, we have on-street parking, we have street lights, street trees. We have these railings that and stairs that address 2 dwelling units. And you can see that the frontage along the wall in the units are green. They're planted and landscaped. So again, here is an example of a pedestrian-friendly environment with sidewalks. You can see the stairs leading up to the multiple units, street trees, on-street parking. So all of the units are addressing the public street.
Buck, this is
Yes, ma'am.
Christina. Could you go back to the first slide? I just wanted to just point out, I know we're going through this, and maybe y'all are all tracking just fine, but just the difference in what he's showing here as our intent and between this and the code would be 1 dwelling unit being served by the staircase versus the 2 that you see here. So just to kind of acknowledge like how you can make 2 joining 1 staircase. It's a logical conclusion at times, not always, but at times. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Right on. Thank you. So the second item is establishing a sense of visual continuity while encouraging creativity and diversity in building form. This is not a rendering of this specific site, but what this conveys is that we have the sidewalk and the on-street parking, and we have steps and walls that serve multiple units. You can see that behind these walls are landscaped areas. So I think a great example of this locally is the Mathis building on South Lumpkin. So again, you have the multiple, the stairs that address multiple units. In this case, it's primarily commercial, but it's the same visual continuity while creating creativity and diversity in the building form. This image here shows the stepping of the buildings, and so that's what we're proposing is consistent with the North Downtown Athens area design area. The buildings step in form to address the topography. You can see the multiple plantings, the balconies, and the accessibility. Similar image here, you can see that these stairs and retaining walls allow access to multiple units and continue to address the street and provide visual continuity and creativity. So this is a rendering of the proposed development looking along Madison Avenue to the north. And so you can see we're using the retaining walls, but we're also creating patios and terraces that allow users and residents to be engaged in downtown and engaging to the street.
And team, I just wanted to acknowledge that while that is a rendering, it's an iteration of one, meaning please don't get attached to color, because we have since punched this up dramatically. So, sorry.
Right on.
I think in form, it does address, and what we were trying to get to today is the building form and the addressing of the public right of way.
So this image is another example of the building sitting higher than the street, but it still creates a continuity and creates vitality. You can see that the retaining walls here have allowed patio space below it, and so there's an opportunity for residents or community members to gather adjacent to the site. Ultimately, as we develop future phases, there will be some commercial components. And so I thought this was just a great image of really the intent and the vision that we're trying to provide. So you can see that there are multiple retaining walls, multiple steps that create a sense of interest to the site. So conveying a sense of human scale. So in this image, very similar to what we're proposing, there will be steps leading up to multiple units. You can see in the background that this set of steps and retaining wall serves multiple units, the same in the steps in the background. And you can see the vegetation and trees. I thought this picture was a great example. This is directly across the street from the planning department or the Common. This is the Presbyterian Church at the corner of Dougherty and College. So this is very similar to what we're proposing as a series of terrace retaining walls with vegetation along the terrace. For example, in this image, the wall is approximately 12 feet tall. So in our development, we're asking for an 11-foot tall wall. So to kind of give you a sense of context. Again, this is very similar to what we're proposing. This is at the Presbyterian Church along College Avenue. And so you have a retaining wall that's approximately 8 feet tall. And they've planted vines along the wall that creep and provide vegetation and greenery and interest. This is very similar to what we're proposing. So you can see that the stairs that address multiple units. You can see the terraced or tiered retaining walls and the vegetation along the frontage of the walls and the terraces. So before I go forward, is there any questions? I've got a couple more slides to go.
I do have one quick question.
Alice, go ahead.
Thank you. Buck asked for them, right? So Buck, when you say multiple units, is it always 2 or is it sometimes more than 2?
Yeah, so it is sometimes more than 2. So in some instances, it's 3 at most.
There's only one instance where it is 3. The others are 2 at a time. And the the 3 is really just at the steepest intersection there at Hall and the Stormwater Park.
I had a question as well, Buck. You mentioned about 3 slides ago on the Presbyterian Church slide that you said there was a wall that was 11 feet tall, and but right before that, it looks like it's about 4 feet tall to me. So
The back wall. I had the same question when we reviewed this PowerPoint earlier.
okay, and so when you say that you're requesting an 11-foot wall at one point in your proposal. Is it in two steps like this one that we see here, where it looks like there's maybe a 5 foot and another 5 foot, or is it a single 11-foot wall?
Yeah, there are a couple of scenarios. So in one instance, we're proposing a 6.5 foot wall, two 6.5 foot walls with terraces in between. Along the linear park where we have the largest change in grade, we are proposing a 11-foot tall wall in one run.
At its highest point, though, I would
Point. That's
just
correct.
acknowledge that majority of that wall is within the code. At its highest point, it goes above the 10-foot max per code. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and is that pictured on this linear park elevation here? And can you indicate with the pointer where that is?
Sure. It's at this location here.
At the very tail end of that wall, it goes above the regulated.
Okay.
And can I ask a quick question? Just as far as you mentioned human scale, I think that was the phrase. And I just wanted to clarify, like, I'm kind of taking that to mean if you're walking along the street and there's things next to you, it's not just, you have the wall, but we're not talking, instead of it being a wall, there's like multiple sort of points of entry. Sorry, that's a design term. There's like sort of multiple things that you could be looking at. There could be some greenery overlapping a wall, or a stairs, or some other visual element to break up the space.
That's correct. That's correct.
I think the next slides, Buck, would be super helpful because I can tell everyone wants to get into the details of exactly where we're asking for what.
Yep, perfect. So this slide shows where we're asking for alternative compliance for retaining walls. So in the orange, this is where the wall does not meet setback requirements. And so if we go back to the ordinance, it says that the wall is supposed to be two feet from the sidewalk, and then from there out, it's 1 foot offset per 1 foot vertical. Does that make sense? One foot horizontal, 1 foot vertical.
Above which height?
I'm sorry?
Above, the ordinance states like that ratio calculation starts after a certain height. Does that, in your scenario, does it start also above a certain height? Or that ratio starts to be 1 to 1?
Yeah, so in this particular case, the wall is 5 foot offset of the edge of pavement or edge of sidewalk, and then it's 10 feet tall at its highest.
Okay.
So there is not a 1-for-1 ratio. It's really
So I'm sorry. So is that true of each of the orange asterisks there, that it's a 10-foot wall that's 5 feet back from the sidewalk?
No, it just means that the wall does not meet the setback requirements. And we can look at the elevations for each of these orange locations.
Can I also just acknowledge, so I think we're kind of playing in between imagery here, but at the original meeting, we did key every scenario and detailed exactly what the height was and the setbacks were and such, and it was quite overwhelming. And so what we put before you now is what I think we were hoping to simplify it, but you're correct. Each of these orange dots are slightly different as well, but those are the locations in which, for example, we're not stepping back the retaining wall height per the code precisely, but no, they're not all the same 10-foot wall. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, it did. And just to be sure that we're clear as you go through them, I'm looking at section 9-10-6 C8. And it's a little different. Buck, I think you just said it was 1 foot horizontal for 1 foot vertical is the required setback. But what I see in that section is 2 feet horizontal for every 1 foot vertical in height. Yeah, there you go. In that above 3 feet, it has to step back 2 feet for every 1 foot of additional height. So for instance, a 10-foot retaining wall should be
14 feet.
14 feet back from the sidewalk by code. Am I
Yeah.
understanding that right?
I stand corrected.
Yeah. And where some of these break down, guys, too, and it's like the example Buck showed on the back of the Presbyterian church, is that, there is a section of that wall that is more than 3 feet tall that is not 2 feet set back off the right of way. And that in and of itself is, once you get beyond really about here on this wall, the rest of it should, under today's standards, would need to be offset. And I think what they're running into on some of their wall combinations are the combination of this height and its associated setback is pushing everything further back off the road than they're trying to get it a little closer to the street than it is in combination in some cases too.
In other words, I guess I just wanted to break it down because this is confusing and we should go through each scenario so everyone is as clear as we can make it. But we want to continue to address the pedestrian scaled environment. We understand the intent of the code. In the instances where we are not meeting this particular code as written, whether because we don't have an existing setback from the right of way from the sidewalk, and we need to push up to it and have a retaining wall, or if the retaining wall, is 12 inches higher at its highest point than the allowable height. We are softening it with landscaping. We are trying to still set it back, provide building articulation, and really try to soften that edge. And we just didn't want to set back as far as we would have to. If you can imagine some of the steeper areas of the site, you would have no street. You would not address the street at all if you set back by the required ratio. We'd be quite challenged in doing so, I'd say that. So Buck, do you want to walk us around the site, the orange, maybe starting from the corner of Hall?
Yeah,
and the sidewalk
absolutely.
there?
So, let me see if I can. So we start at the corner of Hall. So can everybody see the building elevation here in front of you?
Yes.
This is as if I'm standing on Hull Street looking at the building?
That's correct. So you can see Hull, Madison, the proposed Madison Avenue is to the right of the building. And you can see that the retaining wall and stairs comes to enter in. These are single dwelling units. So these stairs and patio serve one unit. And then you can see here, again, a wall that's 9 feet tall. It's not offset what would be the required offset, but it addresses one unit, right? So there's an entryway to each unit.
How much is it offset, this 9-foot wall?
I'm sorry, I can answer that for you in just a second. My computer is telling me my files are too big.
That elevation you're showing us from where we're looking at the whole street, is that the building? There's two buildings, right? Is that what we were just looking at? There's two buildings along Whole Street.
That's correct. And that's building 3. So it's this building.
Okay. And can you show us that? Oh, okay, perfect.
So you see that the wall doesn't have a standard offset. I can also show this to you in.
Just due to the profile of Hull Street, Bacon, Buck? Due to the curve in Hull Street?
I'm sorry?
there just doesn't seem to be a standardized setback of the stairs because it's kind of, the building is trying to, I mean, you got to build kind of a somewhat straight building in that regard with the unit typology, but then you've got a lot of curve in Whole Street there.
Well, yeah, horizontal curve, yes.
Sorry, I forgot you guys always work with the drainage.
So the offset in this situation along Hull is 3 feet from the back of sidewalk on the first wall and 4 feet from the wall to the left.
And so those two walls you were just referring to, they're the walls that are 10 feet high?
These walls are 9 feet maximum at its highest.
So to be clear, the request in these particular instances is not the wall height, nor is it the multiple building entrances. It is simply the setback, the step back requirement of the retaining wall, Sarah.
Got it. It's just not far enough back. Or it's not as far back as normally would be required. That makes sense.
So normally a 9-foot wall would need to be 12 feet back, and these are 3 feet and 4 feet back.
That's correct.
I guess, you know, human scale is a very subjective term, but to me, a 9-foot wall that's right within, you know, an arm's reach as you're walking up the sidewalk doesn't feel like it's at a human scale. You're sort of overshadowed by the wall. Like, you know, can you talk a little bit about why you think that this meets the standard for alternative compliance? Because it feels pretty borderline to me to have a 9-foot wall so close to the sidewalk when the code would say that a wall that's 3 feet back from the sidewalk could be what I guess about 5 feet high, and you're going 9 feet, so that feels like quite a jump. It doesn't feel as human scale as a 5-foot wall would.
Sure. So we feel like by softening up that frontage with vegetation provides that human scale, and so you're no longer facing a 9-foot wall. There's a 3-foot or 4-foot verge that's planted with shrubs and greenery.
I just want to chime in there and also express the partnership that is formed to create this redevelopment doesn't take landscaping very lightly. And so I just wanted to express, you know, full desire for feedback and input and holding our feet to the fire, if you will, on our landscaping there, so that you aren't getting small shrubs, but that we're actually putting in some nice, well thought out softening.
Could I ask about materials of these walls? You know, the wall that you're showing in the slide right now is pretty different than the wall that's just poured concrete.
Mm-hmm.
What's the plan with materials for these walls?
So, and I'll go back to the code. So, it says acceptable exterior finish material include but are not limited to, and I'm not saying this is what we're doing. I'm just sharing with you what the code requires. Is stucco, split face blocks, brick, stone, glass blocks, curved interlock blocks, wood, tubular steel, wrought iron bars, or other grill work, texture or scored, poured concrete, vegetative walls, or anything that may be approved by the planning director. I say all that to say that I think we haven't decided on a wall material. We have discussed concrete. We discussed granite rubble. So granite rubble is what's at the Hotel Indigo. If you're familiar with that, you know, we don't have a set material at this point, but it's up for discussion. Yeah. Yes, Alice.
I have a question. I think your illustration of the First Presbyterian Church wall is quite illustrative, because I've passed by that wall many times and it never struck me as out of scale or intimidating, and yet it achieves pretty much the same height as some of the walls you're talking about, and the the wall up front looks like it's at least at head height when it's sitting right next to the sidewalk. I don't see any problem there. I view that some of these criteria for construction in the downtown to be extremely prescriptive and rather limiting.
I also just want to chime in, and I know we are a little all over the place here, but I wanted to acknowledge that this particular site, if many of you participated in the master planning, and I'm sorry, I'll take myself off of that. Many of you participated in the master planning work that we did, and I recall Buck and I working together on that and noting that water is going to flow downhill, and this particular phase 1 is located right adjacent to what I think Buck has some good imagery of the adjacent wetland park to treat that stormwater flowing downhill. I say all that to say that I think that this is going to be one of the more challenging sites of this entire redevelopment. Unfortunately, it's our first, but I just want to acknowledge that it's got some pretty severe slopes, and that is because it's going to the lowest point on the site.
And Sarah, I'm not really sure if I'm supposed to be recognizing Alice or you.
Oh, I don't need to talk, so I think you can recognize Alex.
Typically, the chair would recognize me. So I was waiting for Sarah to recognize me. But I understand we're in some less formal, I don't know, continuation of our previous meeting.
I recognize you formally.
I did just want to go back to what Matt was asking about in terms of the height. And I had a very simple question. I'm sure it's answered if I could get my ruler out here, but how long, as I walk down Hull Street, am I going to be walking by a wall that is like 10 feet tall?
So this location here, actually I have a better image.
9 foot.
So you would be walking adjacent to that wall for, I'm gonna say 10 or 15 feet. It's 9 feet at its tallest. It's probably 8 feet short on the other end. What you see in the background is actually another wall that meets the standard. So it's set back significantly from the sidewalk.
So it's only the part that has number 23 on it that's actually at the 0 setback line.
That's correct.
So that makes it kind of difficult to answer her question.
So in plan view, it looks like this. So you can see the internal wall that is offset from the sidewalk that doesn't require alternative compliance. You see the staircase that serves the dwelling unit. And then this is the wall that you see that we're asking for alternative compliance for.
How long is that wall, that particular component of it?
So I'd say it's about 10 or 15 feet. And then it tapers down.
Can we go ahead and keep walking down Hull Street to answer her question? Because I think there's 2 scenarios if you're walking from Madison. I say down, but northward on Hull. So you would hit those 2 scenarios, but then you'd have a break in the buildings, and there'd actually be a pedestrian gate for controlled access into your courtyard. He's zooming in there.
So we were looking at building 3, and so here's the stairs to the individual units. And as we continue walking down North Hull, we have an entrance to the internal courtyard. And then we have another set of walls. These walls meet the standard until we get to the lower end of the building, where we do not meet the standard for setbacks and terrace widths.
And can you show us that elevation again?
So this is the elevation as you walk along Hall Street. So to the far right is Madison. As you come down Hall, there's a break in the building for the entrance to the courtyard. And then you continue to the next building elevation.
Buck, is the break as shown on that elevation to scale?
I believe it is to scale.
It's not a very narrow passage, but I think I get what you're saying. Or
Yeah, I was just really just curious, actually.
So we had actually this break is also intended for fire protection. So we had a lot of conversation with the fire department, and so this break is intended for firemen to access the internal courtyard and the internal units.
Could I ask a question? I guess if this group were to say, no, this is awful, we hate this, these walls are too high, too close to the sidewalk, what are some other ways that you could deal with this? What kind of alternative options would there be besides this?
Man, that's a really good question. It's one that we tried to sort out before we came before you guys. What it would mean is that where we have these buildings, these units on one level, right? So in keeping with the North Downtown design area, we have the buildings stepping in form to conform to topography as closely as possible. If we were to go back to the drawing board, right, to bring this into compliance, these buildings, each one of these units would have to step 5 feet. And so what that would mean is that in these internal corridors, we would have to put staircases in each along the internal corridors. So our concerns with the staircases on the internal corridors is this is a family development, right? So it's intended to serve families. The concern was that children, it would become a safety hazard internal to the building. It also would mean that we would have to have doors that break those individual steps. And so it would give opportunities for people to hide behind the doors or just create in generally an unsafe condition within the corridor internal to the building.
Great. And so this probably seems a little bit not kind of non sequitur, but when we're looking at this view and we're seeing these units, so those units open up into interior hallways. Are those units multi-story? Or is
They are
each unit
single
one
story.
story? Okay. And then the entrances what was the sort of thinking behind, or like rhyme and reason behind which units is it that every front unit, every street facing unit should have an entrance to the street? Is that sort of the general idea? So the ground floor street facing unit should all have an entrance or a shared entrance, in this case, to the street is the idea. But those units that have that also open up to the back hallway.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Yes.
And then, so Buck, you answered my question sort of from a building standpoint, and that reasoning makes a lot of sense to me. But are there any other ways to do things? Like, one thing that strikes me as we're thinking about this is that the elevations you're showing us that show that 9-foot wall, that's a pretty different look than the picture we keep going back to with the Presbyterian church, where you have a 5-foot wall of landscape area and then the 12-foot wall. So as much as I think that's a useful picture, it seems like it's pretty different. Like that picture seems like more what we're looking at. It's the other one that keeps getting shown.
And there are a couple of different scenarios. So yeah, there are some scenarios where you have a wall directly adjacent to the sidewalk. There are other scenarios where we have those walls terraced. So
These three scenarios, you're correct, Sarah, that 0 setback wall with the vines on it is a more likely visual to
Okay.
depict what's happening on Hull Street.
I think that's useful to know. And so what you're saying is that as we go around, there are going to be some that are a little bit more like that two-step thing. And then are there any, at least on these Hull Street images, are there any of these spaces that will become sort of ground level outdoor patios for the residences, the residents?
that's right. So in this image here, so this is facing Hull Street.
Yeah.
You can see that at the top of the wall, there's shared patio and sidewalk space.
Okay, and so like the one that you're showing us right now, that linear sort of sidewalk is going to be, who's using that?
It would just be the residents of these units.
Residents of that, in that case, of that one unit.
That's right. And it would be shared between these 3 units here.
Got it. Okay. And those units, sorry, they do or do not have balconies or anything else, any other sort of outdoor access? They don't, correct? The ground floors?
They do. They have, in this image here, you can see, you can probably barely make out
Oh, yeah.
a patio here. There's also a patio here. And another private patio, here. So each unit does have a private outdoor space.
And then they feed into these collector sidewalks that feed into a collector stair. And in that case, there's 3 units feeding that common sidewalk.
Got
Other
it.
cases are 2.
Okay, that's helpful. I think sort of thinking about, I think what's sort of challenging about this is that I think thinking about sort of downtown, north downtown, it's one thing what we sort of want to experience as a pedestrian in the area, and it's another thing to kind of think about the experience that the residents are having and the privacy, for example, that a ground floor dweller might want. And there is also something to be said for these walls do help establish a little bit of privacy for those residents in some cases. So, you know, while the 9-foot wall scenario is not ideal, there could be sort of a silver lining to that as far as a resident goes.
Well, and for what it's worth, I mean, when we got into early concepts with this way back in the beginning, I think we all knew that coming out of the block, this area was the hardest area on this site in terms of trying to hit grade at street level and maintain any kind of cost-effective construction too. So I think the further we go into this, as the blocks come on, it's going to get a lot better. This is just, y'all have all been down there. This is where it gets super steep right there across from the council, and trying to fit it in, we knew it would be hard.
And I guess I just wanted to acknowledge, Sarah, also what you were saying as a pedestrian environment. Buck and I were discussing earlier is that this is really the transition. This block in particular is a transition from this downtown urban core. We're on the edge of that. This is a transition to the single family kind of more quiet spirit. I would just acknowledge that this particular block within the overall development, again, is kind of unique in that particular aspect.
Yeah. Alice.
Thank you. I feel like this has been a very productive discussion, and I also feel like I very much understand where these alternative compliance sites are. I think that the applicant has done a really good job of addressing the problem. I appreciate the presentation, Buck, and I'm prepared to make a motion to move forward with this. I don't want to wait. What is my actual motion? I'll get that in a second. I don't want to end discussion, but I just want to signal that I feel very much inclined to approve this type 3 request.
Does anybody want to second that?
I'll second that.
Okay. Are there any further comments or discussion about this? Sorry, I can't see everybody at once right now, so I'm looking.
I know it's difficult. I did want to say something.
Go ahead, Kristen.
And honestly, Sarah, it's kind of echoing what you were saying. I'll be honest. My main concern was some of the heights of the walls, but I see how it's really just a portion of a wall, and we're dealing with the grade, so I can understand how that changes the scenario. It's not like one large monolithic thing, and I really appreciate the perspective from the residents of having that separation from the street, because I guess that there's like, it's like a double-edged sword of living in a place that opens right up on the street, where you have people that could be walking straight past your house, but it does offer that sort of separation and privacy. So so I appreciate that, and I do think that given that it is a challenging site, so I'm honestly I'm really cool with what's been done here.
Brad, I have a question for you. I had asked a little bit earlier about materials, and to me, it always kind of comes down to materials and landscaping. Like that's the thing that actually makes, I don't know, that's the thing that brings something that doesn't feel very human scaled into scale for me. And I'm wondering what, so when Buck went to the slide, we were kind of looking at the materials, and that's a pretty wide variety of materials. And I certainly don't want to get into get that granular about what materials are used for the walls and what, and get into micromanaging that, and sort of same with the landscape. But what, as far as the design guidelines go, can you refresh our memory about kind of how landscape plays into things ordinance wise, if at all?
I mean, from our standpoint, the way landscape's going, it's going to soften the corners and the edges, on these walls. There are going to be applications where it's not going to be feasible based on the amount of planting area we've got between the sidewalk and the wall, to put in something that necessarily is going to significantly cover that section of the wall without getting all out in the sidewalk at the same time. And so from those, you try to either hit it with vines or do something for the first 2 or 3 feet at the bottom, to where you're starting to remove some of that height. To me, that's the softening of the wall through landscaping and texture, to me, are the 2 biggest things when we're looking at these wall designs, that they create some interest through their materials and changes of materials and textures, instead of just smooth flat walls. That and I think with the list of materials that they've given us, we can, from a standpoint of us working with them based on this conversation, they don't want to come back to you guys again. And so it really gets to a point that, they've either got to get us to a point where we agree that, y'all are meeting the spirit and intent of what the planning commission said, or you're not. And if you're not, then I do this, and they've got to go back, or they've got to pick something else. And so, I think we're in pretty good shape.
And so the sort of the teeth, or the how are they held to the sort of that they're going to carry out the landscaping as is shown? Like, is that because it will be a binding plan?
There will be landscape drawings that have to be submitted with the construction drawings that meet the spirit and intent of what these pictures show you.
Okay. Okay, great. So does anyone else have a question or thought or comment, or can we do a roll call vote? Looks like we can vote. Okay, so so the motion on the floor is to, I don't actually know the wording. Can you say it again, please, Alice?
If I may, yes. I would like to approve the application from WA Engineering to approve the Type 3 request at 155 Hickman Drive. Is that all I have to say?
I think that's got it.
Okay. And I don't see, is Rick here?
I think Rick may have stepped away, but if you want to call roll, I can just do it verbally here.
I'm here. I can do it.
Okay.
I can do it.
Oh, great, Rick. Okay, go ahead, please. Thank you.
Chris, Morales,
Yes.
Goodrum, Anderson,
Yes,
Hall,
Yes.
and I'm sorry, Alice Kingman.
Yes.
It's unanimous.
Great. Well, Buck and Christina, we're grateful for your time. Thank you for coming back again and giving us more information that we requested. That was very helpful. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I think then, Brad, am I correct in saying that we can just move to your report? Is that right?
Yes, I think that ends the regular business. I mean, my report would go back to the October voting meeting of the mayor and commission. There was one item that was approved. That would have been the Pulaski Street rezoning of the single lot for Stan Mullins. That was approved, and that completes my report.
Okay, great. I think that's it. I do not have a report, so I think we are good to go. So the next meeting then is first Thursday of November, which is the 4th, am I right?
4th. Yep.
Yep.
4th, pretty big agenda. But you know, nothing on, I don't know in terms of anticipated community turnout on any of these, but a lot of stuff again for you all to consider.
Sounds good.
All right.
And continue to meet virtually until we learn otherwise.
Till we learn otherwise, yes.
Okay, great.
Unfortunately.
On that
Okay.
subject, Brad, I was going to ask if you know, I know that for like recent public events like AthFest and the Rumpus, that there's a target number for cases in the community below which the city will issue permits. Do you know, is there any sort of quantified level of COVID at which we might start meeting again in person, or is that just a decision that hasn't been made?
If there is, I couldn't cite it to you at this point. You know, I think we're kind of taking our directions from the mayor and commission as they update their processes, you know, on a regular basis. Right now, you know, they are back meeting in person, and they're sitting together with masks, but they're not allowing individuals into the room to participate other than one at a time or two at a time, which is almost impossible for us until we can get the people that want to participate in the room at the same time with you all, because we don't have the same camera equipment and assistance from law enforcement and others. We're going to drag behind just a little bit, but we are anxious to get you guys back in person and under normal circumstances as soon as we can.
All right, thanks.
Would anyone like to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Great, Matt and someone else I saw. I think Kristen's hand went up. Is that right? Or Alice's hand. Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you on the 4th.
Thank you, guys.